Structure inside hospitals and schools. They launched their missiles from heavily populated areas. And this recent round of fighting between Hamas and Israel is exactly that, a round in an ongoing conflict that goes back decades. Hamas has consistently launched thousands and thousands of rockets into Israel, killing and maiming hundreds of civilians. Why come together bipartisanly? Because in the last week alone, they've fired more than 3,000 rockets into Israel. In April, this didn't make the news, but in April, over 44 rockets fired into Israel. In January, 3 rockets fired into Israel. That's just this year. Why come together bipartisanly? In 2020, more than 130 rocket attacks. In 2019,
Speaker, with all due respect to my colleagues, I must respectfully decline to chase the red herring that's been lobbed onto the House floor. A vote on the procedural question is a vote on the PQ is strictly a procedural vote to move a bill forward, and as our colleagues know, voting no would simply mean that we would hand control of the House floor to them, which I decline to do. As our colleagues know, they're under no obligation to offer any specific amendment, even if they faithfully promise to do so. So let's not distract from the bills that we're here to move forward today. Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from Texas, the lead sponsor of House Resolution 398, recognizing the forthcoming centennial of the 1921 Tulsa Massacre, Ms. Jackson Lee.
The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
I thank the manager for her leadership, and I thank all those who are on the floor that understand the indignity of massacres, racism, and devastating histories that our country has faced. We too are Americans, and I love this country. Last night on the floor of the House, I said that as a young girl, I knew about the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. I knew about Columbus and Abraham Lincoln and George Washington, and that was well, though obviously there are challenges to that history even today. But that is what we knew. But we did not know the history, the slave history, or even the fact that there was something called Tulsa, Oklahoma, a bright and shining star of economic opportunity. This picture shows young girls dancing in a parade, just like today, with cowboy hats on, doing the high school dance team, if you will. None of that was taught to any of us. This prosperous place. And then a community known Greenwood in June 1921, after a series of heinous events nearby, it destroyed the entire Greenwood. We knew nothing about this. 100 years, 3 living descendants. We'll be on our way. I want to thank the Congressional Black Caucus who championed this with me, and our chairwoman, Chairwoman Beatty, for understanding the validity of telling the truth. In this story, they saw men and women and children driven like cattle, huddled like horses, and treated like beasts. I saw hundreds, this is a testimony, of men march through the main business section of Whitetown with their hats off, their hands up, with dozens of guards marching them with guns and cursing them from everything mentionable. They died, 300, in unmarked graves. They were murdered. The attackers looted and intentionally burned an estimated 1,256 homes in Greenwood, America's Black Wall Street, along with nearly all of the district's churches and schools and businesses. When others begin to say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, these freed slaves were barely 100 years, and they developed Greenwood. But yet, this is what happened. This is the body of a charred Negro killed in the riot. How many were like that? As I said, the death toll came about because something happened in an elevator. A word, something like Emmett Till said to a white woman. A firestorm of hatred and violence that is perhaps unequal in peacetime of history of the United States. The white mob destroyed almost 40 square blocks, left almost 9,000 Greenwood District residents homeless. And they continued. And so this is the story 100 years. Look at the smoke of teeming buildings that were industries. People had ice cream parlors. People had restaurants and boarding houses burned to the ground. We come today to say the burned out rules of Greenwood, there's one door left in Tulsa, to be able to embrace those from Tulsa, Oklahoma. They will be here tomorrow for a hearing in the Judiciary Committee. I am honored that this legislation will honor them, and we will know.
An additional minute.
Gentlewoman is recognized for an additional minute.
We will know, and history will tell us, that embedded in the annals of the congressional record will be HRES 398 that talks about that story, but yet we rise above that, not so much to ignore it, but we ask that we condemn the violence in this resolution. We ask the rejection and active opposition to the false ideology of white supremacy. We ask for tolerance and unity. We ask, calling upon Americans to celebrate ethnic and racial and religious diversity. We too mourn those who were killed in Atlanta for Asian hate. And it says, encouraging all persons in the United States to reflect upon all of our history. Yes, we can rise above it, but we must know that the stories that are told says that Tulsa must have some repair, some say reparations. And finally, as I close, we hear a testimony from the great-granddaughter of Howard and Harriet Ector. They were builders and pillars of Black Wall Street. They were featured in the Smithsonian, but they, as a little girl, their great-great-granddaughter, was saved by hiding in a chicken coop at age 9 to dodge bullets. It was a race war. We should not ignore our differences, but we should be unified by who we are. I am delighted to support this resolution. Ask my colleagues to vote for it. With that, I yield back.
Gentlewoman from Texas yields back. The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania reserves. The gentlewoman from Minnesota is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the representative from Florida's 26th Congressional District.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in opposition to the previous question, and if defeated, I urge my colleagues to adopt H.R. 261 by my friend and colleague, Representative Brian Mast. This legislation places strict sanctions on individuals who knowingly aid senior members or supporters of terrorist organizations. This legislation moving forward is important in light of the terrorist acts conducted by Hamas against the State of Israel. These horrific scenes that are coming out of Jerusalem depict countless rockets being launched from Gaza with the intent to massacre innocent civilians. What we have seen from the Iron Dome's ability to intercept this high volume of rockets is really, truly remarkable, but it also underscores Israel's security vulnerability. We're reminded this past week as why the United States must continue to be an ally of Israel and why our commitment to Israel's sovereignty and independence is so crucial at a time of heightened regional hostility. Each rocket launched into Israel was paid for by a certain group or a certain individual, stemming from a vast network of financiers, many from Iran, used by these terrorist organizations. By punishing those who bankroll Hamas and Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations, we are taking an important step in providing Israel and the Jewish people a bold signal of support for their self-defense and their self-determination. This legislation will help put an end to critical financial component of these terrorists by punishing those who facilitate transactions and launder funds on behalf of those terrorist organizations. To my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I call on you to join our efforts to support our ally, Israel. Never again is a phrase we use to cement our determination to protect the Jewish people around the world, and at a time when terrorists are threatening the existence of Israel. Democrats should be willing to join us at the table for the reaffirmation of that commitment. And I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman from Florida yields back. The gentlewoman from Minnesota reserves.
Madam Speaker, I reserve.
Gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from South Carolina, the Majority Whip, Mr. Clyburn.
Majority Whip is recognized for 2 minutes. 3. Majority Whip is recognized for 3 minutes.
I'm sorry?
Is it 3? Gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I thank the gentlelady for yielding me the time. Madam Speaker, I rise today to urge unanimous support for House Resolution 398, recognizing the 100th anniversary of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. As a former history teacher, I often quote George Santayana, who said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." The Tulsa Race Massacre is a prime example of inflaming issues and ignoring history. They both significantly lead to the inability and failure to learn the lessons